Welcome to the Being Human UT podcast, where Dr. Randy Jasmine and Dr. Jim Hindigus will discuss issues relative to the humanities and technology at Utah Tech University. And now your hosts for Being Human UT podcast, Dr. Randy Jasmine and Dr. Jim Hindigus.
Hello, and welcome to the podcast. I am Randy Jasmine, and we are here dropping our probably final podcast of the academic year. We've been doing this now for 4 academic years. We've kind of counted our academic years as seasons. So 4 seasons, Jim. It's flown by, has it not?
It has flown by.
Today we've got a really great topic to talk about. And as we were thinking about the title for it, the title kind of came up as The Future of the University Library. And I'm really excited about talking about this topic because for the last several months I've been working on a committee with members from the library. And I've always, as a teacher of composition, had a pretty close connection to the library, but I feel as though I've learned a lot about what the library does, what the library can do, and really what the library is looking towards in our new kind of technological age. And I'm looking forward to the conversation. So we've got a great guest for this conversation, and I know it's someone you've been working with. So, Jim, why don't you introduce our guest?
Yes. By the way, I feel like that was a very creative way to sell being involved in hiring committees, is that you learn about the other fields, because usually I don't really want to be on hiring committees. Very important, very important.
You learn a lot. You do.
But yes, we have Emma Lanners here, and we're excited to talk to you about open educational resources. And I'm going to be working on a course using OERs. That's the condensed version that we talk about. Mm-hmm. But so just kind of tell us about what your role is involved in the library in general, but also working with open educational resources.
Perfect. Yeah. So my name is Emma. So I am the OER librarian here on campus, and what I do primarily is run our OER program. And so what that looks like can be a variety of different ways. But basically, what I do is support faculty members in the adoption and or creation or use of OER material in their courses. Along with that, I have general librarian duties. So I'm a liaison to 5 departments. I do teaching, I do reference, and kind of general librarianship duties. My main goal is to really help faculty with open educational resources and supporting that either conversion or creation. So, and I really enjoy it. I really enjoy what I do. We have amazing faculty here on campus, and that's one of my favorite parts is I get to interact with every department basically and every faculty member across many disciplines. So
that's great.
Yeah, I really enjoy it.
Well, what are some of the things that, putting you on the spot, but this is a podcast, I put you on the spot.
That's what they're for. Right?
What are some things that, other than working with faculty, what do you really like about OERs? What are some of the things that really get you excited?
Yeah. Well, this is the first time I'm ever doing a podcast like this or any sort of recording, so hopefully I can be articulate as much as possible.
I'm not always, so don't worry about it.
Yeah, I enjoy the special thing about OER is obviously there's for students who really love it, they love the cost saving aspect of it. I think a lot for faculty that can be a motivating factor to engage with the topic or being interested at all, because it has that kind of that immediate financial benefit for students. But what I've seen is the faculty members who engage with it also really enjoy the ability to have control over the content because it has a different licensing mechanism than all rights reserved. We call it some rights reserved, right? So we're allowed to edit or change it or adapt it to fit the specific needs of that course. And so I find that really exciting when faculty members can put their own perspectives, their own voice in material that can really create a customized learning experience for students. One really good example, and your English department has been so supportive with OER, which has been fantastic, but you have one colleague, Rick Andes, who's created his own textbook, and he based it upon Hitchhiker's Guide to the Galaxy. It's kind of like an inspirational lens to look through it. And so like his voice is really unique, and then the students are getting a very unique learning experience through that book and through his teaching. And so that's what I really love about OER is it provides that opportunity rather than having more of a, I want to say stale, but more of like a traditional textbook perspective that you normally get. And so I find that really, really exciting when I can support that kind of creativity and innovation in that way.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I mean, for the makeup of our student body, being able to reduce costs is really a very important thing. And in many cases, it can be a deal breaker for someone attending college or not. What kinds of costs beyond tuition are we going to have our students pay or expect our students to pay? And, I put on the list of points that I sent to you that wanted to talk about OER, kind of small picture and then big picture. Staying with the small picture, you tell me if you have this sense, both of you, but I also feel, OER has been around for a long time, but it's really gotten a lot of momentum in the last decade, 2 decades, and has really become something that people talk about. And I've noticed, I'm going to confess, full disclosure here, I have not used OER resources yet. I plan on it. And in discussing it with Jim, it is a big project, and I just have not had the time to do that. But it seems to me like it has forced textbooks companies, at least the textbook companies that we work with in composition, to kind of take notice and change things a little bit. Mm-hmm. There's a lot more options out there for cheaper bundles and cheaper variations of textbooks, and I think that the competition from OER has a lot to do with that. What do you two think about that?
Yeah, I agree. Most definitely in the past 10 years, specifically, I'm going to and again, like there might be things that I say wrong here or not completely expertise, but from my observation and my experience, one of the big OER publishers called OpenStax from Rice University, I attended a conference last year, and there was a data organization that does kind of surveys and kind of data gathering within the OER landscape, and they said that the OpenStax was within the top 5 uses as far as like academic publishers for textbooks. So it's up there with Pearson, with Macmillan, McGraw-Hill, like those types of publishers. As far as a use, it's up there with them. And I think that a lot of those private companies do feel that pressure to lower costs. And one of the things that they've introduced in the past, I would say decade-ish, would be inclusive access. And a lot of our faculty use inclusive access, and it can be a really, really good solution. I like to call inclusive access, and a lot of people in the OER community call it forced renting, because you're not buying a textbook for longevity. You're renting a digital version, and it goes away at the very end, which for some contexts can be really, really good. And it is usually cheaper, but there are drawbacks to it. It has limitations on, how many pages you can print or download. If you're like a physical copy person versus OER, you have that right and freedom to do as many copies as you want. I think it depends on the context of what the faculty member wants to teach, their goals are. But yes, publishers have moved in the direction of trying to combat this cost narrative, which we in the OER community, I think, maybe have done to our detriment a little bit, in that focusing on the cost savings is the only benefit, whereas we have so much more that can be done with OER rather than just the cost savings aspect of things. But yes, there's definitely more of that notice and awareness from private publishers for sure.
And that's good. I mean, I think that those options that we can pursue as instructors and at universities put the pressure on those publishers to actually meet our needs, as opposed to just sort of doing what they think is best for them, and then we just kind of have to work with it. I think that's good. I mean, my interactions with publishers, I think they're aware of that. They're aware of the change in the industry, and they're trying to. I mean, there's a little bit of survival aspect in what they're operating on, but I mean, there's value to what they give. Well, you know, what you were brought up about this idea of control. Like, I think that's incredibly valuable, I think, for an instructor to feel like they can create their own content. But on the other side, sometimes it seems so overwhelming. A lot of instructors want to just be given the content. And I find what I do as an instructor, my pattern is that the first few times I teach something, I kind of just want it laid out for me. Like, I want a template. And then I find out what I'm tired of and what I don't like and the lack of control that I have in the class. And then I'm like, okay, we need to change this. And so do you find that a lot of people adopting OERs early on, and I guess I'm going to find this out because I'm adopting, it is that they need a lot of just sort of templates. Like, I'm just going to cut and paste from what's been done before. So once they get their footing, and then they or do you find that some people just go creative right off the bat?
It really depends. It depends on what stage they are within their teaching career. You're correct. Like, if you're a new professor and you're coming in, you're like, I got to figure out teaching and like what learning outcomes are and like assessments. Like, that's a lot to do. So the thought of taking on something that you might have to create additional stuff to flesh out what you really truly want to teach, even when you don't even know what you want to teach in the first place. So a lot of times they will, faculty who are new may not go in that direction of OER right away, but they might teach with a traditional textbook, or they might borrow something that's been used in a department for a really, really long time. And then as they're teaching, they decide, oh, there's gaps here that I don't really, really enjoy, or I don't like the perspective that are being supplied here. So I want to make adjustments and create my own material. I find it just depends on the faculty member's perspective. For example, I was last year I was talking to, this is just examples that are coming to my head, so there's probably others, but they're ones that are coming. I had a music faculty member who was teaching the general education course, and he was talking to me about the inclusive access material they have, and he's like, you know what, it's not really giving the experience I want for my students. It's not covering things in a straightforward way, or I have to skip them around to go into the order that I would like, and it's just not as great of an experience. So we chatted about some of those benefits that can be solved with OER. Now there is the consideration of time. You know, like Randy's saying, like he doesn't have a lot of time to do OER, and there is a big time sink. And so what I've tried to do is provide support to faculty to make that lift a little bit easier. So I will do discovery for them. So a lot of time goes into the actual finding of material. And so as a librarian, that's what I do and what I enjoy doing. And so I can provide a curated list of materials. I'm doing that right now with like 5 other people. I'm doing one for a health communication course, and a couple of sociology courses right now. And so they can pick and choose there, and they can kind of go in the direction of curating something, or they can be like, no, this isn't really what I'm wanting. I want to create something myself. So it just depends on what the goals are for the faculty, and I can support whatever they're needing at that point in time.
Well, I think when we talked earlier, I mean, one of the advantages I find as an instructor is that I can pick and choose and link up on Canvas. And, there was way back in the day before OERs, I felt like I had to find a textbook that will have everything, because I couldn't really afford to, the students couldn't really afford to have multiple textbooks. I mean, I'm sure that you remember the days, and you might even still have courses like this, Randy, where, I remember the book list was 12 books of literature, but you could find most of those for under $10. And now it's just reaching a point where, I need to find especially for a composition class, I don't want the students to buy anything more than one book. And so, but with OER, I could link 20 different texts, because all it is a text that doesn't cost them anything, and it could be somewhat seamless. It doesn't seem like they're navigating 20 different texts. It just feels like it's another link for week 5 or whatever.
Yeah, exactly. I think the learning management systems like Canvas make it a lot easier to put things in one place for a better experience for the students when you're using multiple areas that way.
Yeah, and I guess this is an argument for OER. What you mentioned earlier about inclusive access is exactly the experience that I'm having. I've had a great literature class this semester, and for the first time I've used, primarily because it was a cheaper option. I'm using the inclusive access to volumes D, E, and F of the Norton Anthology of English Literature. And so it's right there. And you're right, you only get so many words in each section that you can copy. I'm very much of a visual instructor. I love to put important quotations. I love to, if we go over passages, I like to have those passages on the board as we're doing them. So over the years, I've filled up. I don't even use PowerPoint because I have long quotations, and nothing worse than tiny little writing on a PowerPoint slide of a long, Victorian novel quotation. So I would just put them on, documents that I would share with my class. That's been wonderful to not have to do that this semester. Have all my notes in this inclusive access book. It's searchable, so all spent the whole semester saying, okay, you're talking about a specific quotation. Give me the first 3 words of that quotation you're talking about, and there we are. And then you hit the nail on the head with the problem, and that is you're going to lose access. Mm-hmm. And I've had great students in this class, students who I think, and I don't always think this way about students, the majority of them probably want to keep their text, certainly want to keep the notes that they made over the course of the class, and they're going to lose that. Mm-hmm. And it's an issue, so I go back and forth with it. And the problem with my survey is it starts in British, it starts in 1800, American, it starts in 1865, and they both come to the present. So as you would predict, 50 to 75% of the material that I cover in those surveys is in the public domain.
Yeah.
But then as we get close to contemporary times, it's no longer in the public domain. So I can't, say to them, oh, don't worry about buying a book if you can just get that online. And of course, again, searchability for me when it comes to, we're talking literature here, and to some extent composition, but literature in particular, searchability for me, and I think searchability for my students is really something that's very, very important. And I can see how OER can help with that. Searchability, and then I guess, I don't know if I would use the word sustainability, but they can keep it and they can refer back to it. I know they're not like me. I never sold an English textbook back when I was a student. Sold all my other textbooks back at a, for 10% of what I paid for it. But at the end of a semester, when you're an undergraduate, that's great, right? But I want to encourage my really interested literature students to do that. And with inclusive access, that's not really an option. So, I'm maybe at an intermediate stage where I'm not making massive copy and paste or typing up quotations on documents that I share in class. But I'm also not using something that's a little bit more practical for my students.
Mm-hmm. Well, I think it makes a good point that OER doesn't work for every single class. In every single application. Like some of those literature things are not going to be in the public domain, like you're saying, Randy.
Correct.
So it may be even feasible where you're having some costs, but then you're also linking stuff that might be in public domain. You might have a combination. I like to talk to my faculty about like spectrums of openness, right? Because sometimes you may not be able to feasibly do a full open textbook or what Jim's doing in composition, or maybe you have standards that need to be taught, right? Like in engineering, ASEE standards, those are not public domain. Those are not open access. Those have to be purchased, and the students need to know them. So that's not going to be a feasible solution for them. So it's not a panacea, and I'm not so dogmatic with it that I force it upon every single conversation. If it makes sense, it makes sense. But like you're saying, like that longevity of having that knowledge that foundational knowledge, if you're interested in literature, or you're interested in a certain discipline. So I worked with a biology faculty, Doug Sainsbury, and he converted his 1610 bio course, which I think is like introduction to bio for bio majors. And so that foundational concepts are going to take those students into their actual majors, right? And so he has his section OER, and they're able to keep that book the whole time. They can make modifications. They can download it. They can make their own material out of it that could bring them into those other classes. So I think it's just really situation dependent for sure. Mm-hmm.
When you bring up, Randy, this applies to this sort of a generational shift or a mindset shift. I don't know where it is, but I have a picture of I was posing in front of all the books from my freshman to senior year as an English literature major, and I'm pretty sure it was about my height.
Wow!
Of just the book, because I was like I was saying, I mean, there were courses where you would be over 10 books. I had to kind of stack the smaller paperbacks towards the top, and then like the big giant, like the Shakespeare,
the Riverside
Shakespeare was at the bottom.
Yeah.
But I mean, that mindset is gone now. I mean, for a student, I assume that they are not wanting to lug around a textbook. There were times when I had to really think strategically about my backpack and would hold all the texts. And now it's like they have their phone. I mean, some students just come to class with just a phone, which I would like them to do a little bit more than that. But I mean, do you see this idea, this shift, the digital, but the accessible? Like this idea that they're always going to be able to access it in a digital space, in a cloud or something, or online. That's just a shift I think that I'm still adapting to. And it feels really old to say that I'm still adapting to this, because I'm still saving things on a USB drive, which is still kind of an old thing to do.
Well, at least it's that, and not, like a disc, right?
Yes, it's not a disc or like a floppy disc, or like the little 3-point whatever.
Right. That brilliant transformation from 5.25 to 3.5.
Yes,
we thought we were, on just preparing ourselves for the future, right?
Cutting edge.
Yeah, exactly. I'm trying to think of the first time I got a laptop that didn't have a drive for discs, but yeah, it would have been a long time ago. Mm-hmm. Yeah, I mean, those things are very, things to think about, because people respond differently. I liked the reading, but again, on my computer screen, if I had to read those texts on my phone, I wouldn't have liked it so much. Reading them on my computer screen, making the notes, and like I said, going back to them was there. But I think, like you said, there's still students who the phone is the primary mode of dissemination of information, and that's just how it's going to be, and we have to kind of deal with that.
Well, I also think that we also have to think about non-traditional students, right? So those returning students who might be in they're not in the 18 to 24 category that our main population is. And so, but I think one benefit of OER too that goes into meeting needs of different learners, because you have that copyright freedom to make different versions of things. So you can do translations of OER without having to ask permission to do so. You can make a Braille version of an OER textbook without having to ask. I mean, Rick Andes, I'm going to Rick again, but he made a narration of his book. So for people who they don't have the time to sit down and read, they're busy mothers, right? They got to make dinner, or fathers have to make dinner, take care of families. They can listen to it. And you could make a version of that without having to ask for permission. If you're a physical person, you can print it off, versus all that is restricted when you have something that's an all rights reserved copyright. So there's a lot more freedom you can do. Now, freedom equates a little bit more work, right, that goes into it. But I think once that work is done, there's a lot of benefit that happens with that.
I remember, I think it was in my undergrad, that moment when I think an instructor assigned individualized readings, and they went to the campus printer and they gave me like a binder, and then I was like, great. And they're like, yeah, that will be $85. And I'm like, what? You just went to the copier and you printed this out. But then, and that's when I learned about, the rights and what you had to pay for that. And so, there's a real luxury in just being able to print that out without that cost. That is really nice. For those who had that experience, they will know that it's like, oh, this is great. Like, it's just going to cost me the printing cost.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. And a lot of OER, if it has certain designations called non-commercial, that means that it's just to be sold at cost. There's no profit markup on it. It's not allowed. So.
Well, I want to change subjects here, and I don't know, I think that we'll all just kind of give our opinions on this, but hearkening back to my opening where I said, I was learning a lot about how libraries work. I think those of us in departments that are dependent on databases as repositories of scholarly, peer-reviewed, credible information, that we just kind of sit around and think, we only make any kind of comment about those databases when we lose one, and it's one that our students used and we're upset about that. Mm-hmm. We had an experience in the last year or so where the library did a tremendous job of I don't say replacing, but when the English department kind of raised some concerns about a database that a lot of people use, the people in the library kind of directed us to one that turned out to be not only a good alternative, but probably a better one. But what I have learned, and this is where I'm kind of saying it's going to be opinion, it bothers me that we are in an era where it seems like we have to fight bad information. That every day in our lives as teachers, educators, librarians, we're fighting against bad information. But the problem that I was made aware of serving on this committee is that the people who are the holders of the good information are making it more and more expensive. Mm-hmm. And instead of saying, hey, we should be leading this fight against, bad information, it's becoming harder and harder to get the good information. So I don't know if there's a question in that, except, what do you think the future holds when it comes to academic library, university libraries' access to the most significant and important scholarly, peer-reviewed research data?
That is a good question, and I don't know if I have a perfect answer for it or a correct one. I think I'll kind of just wander around with a couple of different thoughts here. So there's a system in publishing when we're talking about academic type publishing. And it's a problem that got identified within what's called the open access movement. It's kind of like a prong or a sister to OER, actually. And it's along the lines of open research and open publishing journal articles. And we don't have really a lot of ecosystem here because we're not a research-heavy university. But there are other universities' movements to create systems and support to have research that's done by faculty members that's going to be then sent to a journal that is then going to be published and then sold back to a library. So we're basically trying to cut out that middleman of a publisher. And so it's called the open access movement, and there's different tiers of what it looks like, but there's a lot of trying to remove this. These private companies who are then trying to sell back the intellectual property and work that are done by faculty members at mostly state-run, tax-supported schools, right? Or they're maybe getting grants from federal sources, right? Public funds to publish that openly. And so I think that's grown. It's definitely grown in the past 10 years. Again, we don't do anything really here at UT, but I think libraries are becoming more of that publication hub, especially at like R1s. So providing resources for faculty members to do author publishing charges. So a lot of open access journals will have charges in order to publish because they need to support the functions. Some libraries are starting their own journals or do pre-publications or have policies in place to where faculty members can archive a pre-publication of their journal article so it's accessible freely and openly rather than behind paywalls. But I don't know if that's going to solve everything. There might need to be some sort of realignment with the market because libraries have finite resources and universities have finite resources, and you're battling against tuition raises and student, the cost that the students are bearing, as well as the taxpayers are bearing. And so it's a really complex system. But I do see there's more movement in making that foundational knowledge with research, peer-reviewed publications, even in books, to be more open access, which kind of gets into that connection of OER within that same sphere. That's been going on for 5 to 10 years. But I don't know if I have a solution for the ongoing problem of shrinking library budgets. I think it has to be a reinvestment from the university. And a lot of times, as you found out, Randy, like our budgets aren't shrinking, but inflationary costs are increasing. Right. So each year, the way libraries work is we subscribe to databases from private companies. EBSCO and ProQuest are two of the really big ones. And then there's inflationary cost added onto that subscription every year. So it's between 3% and 5%. But if a library budget is stagnant, that's essentially cuts in a way. And so you have to kind of reorganize, realign of what that might look like. And it's a challenge, and I don't know if I have the solution to it. I'm definitely, not a dean or director in kind of that leadership perspective, but it is something that we talk about frequently, because part of our mission is to provide access to these resources for faculty and students. So you have a breadth that meet the curriculum needs and the research needs for your classes, students, and yourselves. So I don't know if I have a great answer. It's hard.
I'm not sure any of us do. There was one chilling moment where one of the people talking about this said, "Oh, and these companies," he didn't name any particular, but he's talking about the companies that have these databases and subscription service. These companies know what every school's budget is, and they're going to, set a price where they can get everything out of you that they possibly can. And it was just this really kind of draconian, we're going to make as much profit on this as possible. And it was scary because, like I said, so what's the alternative? We're left with, the really kind of search and find operations that our students do, on their own, that they don't, we spend some time, at least I spend some time in English 1010 talking about, fact-checking websites and things like that. But it's, I've always had the haven of the database to fall back on. We get to a point where I say, okay, you can use popular sources as well as scholarly sources, but those popular sources even have to be found through database research. And a day where that's not available any longer just kind of scares me, when I hear people say, actually the United States, bombed Dresden after the armistice in World War II. And, Winston Churchill was the real villain of World War II. And no, it's right here. I read about it. And look at all of these links at the bottom of the page that this source has referring me to other things that are saying similar things. I just guess I'm being naive and thinking people would want to be like me and fight that misinformation at whatever cost to them it might be. Whereas, it doesn't usually work out that way.
Well, I talk. So I do teaching too. So I'm invited to do one-shots or help with information literacy instruction in my assigned areas. And whenever I start off discussing research in the context. It's usually tied to a specific assignment, so I gear it towards that. But I always talk about research in the context of what you're needing the information for. And so if you're like your general curiosities, right? Like, oh, who is this actor that I saw on this Netflix show? Or, who is this so-and-so person that I'm really curious about? I might look up really well because that doesn't have any sort of like impact in like decisions or opinions or more in-depth things that are going to have greater impact on my lives or other people's lives, right? But when we're in the context of like classes or in the context of like, I need to have an educated opinion on this thing that is on my ballot next year or an opinion about a certain happening that's going on. I talk about that we're going to be looking at more than just a surface layer AI summary that comes up at the top of Google or using Gemini or ChatGPT. We're going to be more critical in the way that we look at information. We're going to, double check sources, make sure information is consistent using a couple different questions that we have in our minds. But I don't think that is something the students especially, and then maybe even the general population, do like from a day-to-day basis. But so I think it's important to like kind of decategorize those two kind of search intents. Because, I might just be curious about something and find it versus something I need to be more in depth and more critical about before I might share it.
Yeah, that's a good way of doing it. It's a good way of getting them to think about those things differently. Because it's very vital that we allow them to make that distinction and let them know what they can do and should do when they have to make that distinction, right?
Mm-hmm.
I have so many thoughts, but I'm going back to what you were saying, Randy, about this sort of fighting bad information, fighting a lack of credible information, and this the old battle, which I think has been the longstanding battle as an instructor, is just to get the students to go to the library, to just bring them to the stream and then drink. I remember there were times when I'm just like, hey, just go there, just check out a book,
Mm-hmm.
just see how that process goes for you, maybe read it, and now it's with the mass amount of information, it's now you need to be discerning, and that is also probably just as important as accessing it and then being discerning, because the easy way out is just to put in a Google search and see what happens and
Mm-hmm.
whatever's the most exciting thing. Going along with all of this and the money that you brought up, there's so many interested parties that are wanting to either sell to you, like we talked about, or all those free sources. It's not free necessarily. There's an interest in there. They want to promote an ideology. They want to promote an idea. Probably sell a product of some sort. The students just don't know it, or the
Mm-hmm.
people don't know it. And so it's just I don't really have an answer either. It's the more I talk about it, the more it's very overwhelming. But still bringing them to that space and that curiosity is a driving goal. That's what I try to do as an instructor, is just bring them to that space. I mean, one of the things is, as kind of an added topic to this, is that the size of a library is shrinking, just the physical space of it.
Mm-hmm.
And I'm glad that the library really hasn't shrunk a ton since it moved over into the Holland building, but just creating that physical space for them to be in. Do you find that's a disadvantage or an advantage when it feels like most of their interaction in the library is mostly online? It's not a physical, because I have lots of memories of being in libraries to do work, and I don't know if that's the modern student's experience. I don't know if being in the library is part of their research process. It's being in their own personal space with their computer.
Mm-hmm. I think I don't have data to back it up, but I think when we talk about libraries losing space, I think we may be talking about more like the physical collections, because we are doing a lot more collecting with digital materials, ebooks, databases, things like that. We still collect things in physical books, and I don't think that'll ever go away, because there's some disciplines to where, or some books in certain areas to where I can only get a physical copy, or an ebook would be prohibitively expensive. So, but I think we're rethinking spaces within libraries to offer more services. So a lot of libraries will bring in, we already have that with like the tutoring and writing centers, to have it more of a student support space. Some libraries even have like advising open hours within it. I think it's going to be a combination of a digital space as well as physical spaces. What's great about libraries is that they're space neutral. And so if you have a service or a thing that goes into this space, it's not owned by one particular department or initiative or things like that. It is democratized, and anyone can have access to it. And I think there will still always be the need to circulate items, technology, like our laptop lending program is a really good example. A lot of libraries do technology circulation. We still have physical reserves. I think it's going to, place is still an important part of the physical footprint of a library. And I think what we've been able to do as libraries is adapt over time to what our users want and need. And I think we saw with the pandemic, like a lot of our students don't want to go online. They're here for that physical space, that physical interaction, that experience. And so I do think it will always be there. What it looks like and what it offers, I don't quite know. But like maker spaces were a really big thing in like public libraries. Every year, the ALA magazine puts out a library spaces or like design contest, and you get to see all these beautiful buildings that are still being invested in. And so I don't think that they'll ever go away. And I think that people still find value in the physical spaces. And then people also find value in the online spaces too. It's providing that access and those services to both of those user bases.
I really hope so, because I mean I think you're right. I mean, one really encouraging thing post COVID was just sort of that you saw that desire for people wanting to be physically close to other people, to interact with them, as opposed to being isolated. And that was a fear that it was just sort of we're all going to be dispersed and never interact with each other. And but it does. The physical spaces of the libraries are always intriguing to me. A couple years back, I went with my family to D.C. and we went to the Library of Congress.
Oh, it's my favorite.
It was
there too.
It's so beautiful, but it was also kind of one of those funny things. I mean, of course, there were lots of restricted space, but there were people that were like getting pictures with themselves looking like they were studying there. It's just like a posing, which was a little bit scary for me, because I think, is this kind of like a bygone thing? You're like, I'm going to get a picture of me looking like I'm studying at the library, and then I'm going to get a picture by the cotton gin. And it's just sort of like this idea where like, it's not that old to study at a space. It's just maybe a little bit of a different type of space. But I think about that physical space, and it's one of the things that's discouraging, I find, when I go to a more commuter type school, which I really don't think we are. I feel like we almost used to be, with a little bit less study space, but I think we're really building study space. But it is discouraging when it just seems like you get students that just come and then go, and they don't stay on campus to get their research done. And so I'm always encouraging them, just stick around, maybe take a nap, and then just be on campus.
I would love if we had nap pods in the library.
Yeah.
That would be amazing.
That would be great.
Yeah. I don't know if that'll ever fly, though.
But yeah, my information on this is anecdotal as well. But I mean, we see it, on the 4th floor where the English department is located for a few more months. But we've been there for 13 years. We've been there for the entire length of the Holland building. And the only library facilities that we have on the 4th floor are study spaces. And, Jim and I were both on the building committee for the Holland building. And right from the beginning, it was, and this wasn't innovative, 13, 15 years ago, but it was fairly new it wasn't going to be a place where, the libraries we had gone to as undergraduates. Nothing but water, no drinks, no food, nothing like that. It was going to be a place where students could do certain things to make themselves more comfortable that they hadn't been able to do in libraries in the past. And so I have just been stunned by how much use those study rooms get. And I will even go farther and say in the last 5 or 6 years, there's really been a phenomenon where the students know exactly when every single one of those classrooms is free. And when a classroom is free, and I'm talking like an hour in the middle of the day, not just, after 3 o'clock, there aren't any more classes there. There's an hour in the middle of the day where any of those classrooms on the 4th floor of Holland do not have a scheduled class. There's students in there studying. And so they've really, utilized that kind of space. And so I was thinking, they will technically lose some of that because those will be, testing center facilities where those will be used pretty much throughout the course of the day. But I think we have really seen a change in the way that people have. I think we have increased in terms of our on-campus population. I think that we have made strides to allow facilities for all different kinds of students, right? For both introverted and extroverted students. And I just hope that in this push towards, libraries aren't important anymore, we don't say the same thing about library space. Mm-hmm. Yeah, it's been pretty amazing. I always, it's rare that you ever walk by any of those study rooms and see them empty. The common study area is busy pretty much in the traditional times that you would think, but yeah, the classrooms definitely have become study spaces as well.
Yeah, our study rooms are always used. So I'm hopeful that they'll continue to be used for spaces for individual quiet study and well as group study. And hopefully we'll get some more study rooms back because there's a few in the back on the 4th floor that were taken up by honors and a few other places.
Right.
And I'm hopeful we'll get those back, but we'll see.
Funny you say that. This is just completely an observation. I walked around the corner last week and there was a student staring at. We have an office that was, back to us being on the planning committee, that was initially a study room, the one that's clearly a study room, right? Mm. And there was a student standing there in front of it just looking at the office. And I said, are you looking for a room? And he said, well, I'm on my phone and the scheduling app says that that's a study room. And yet I see the names of 2 faculty members on there. I'm like, yeah, that's a faculty office, but it won't be in a couple months. Yeah. In a couple months, it will be back to being a study room. And so already we need that back as a study room. So,
oh yeah, students always want more study rooms, private study rooms. Yeah. Mm-hmm.
So it's interesting to watch. It's interesting to see, and I think there are the group study sessions too. We had a place at Utah State. The building's not even there anymore, but there was one place called the Fishbowl that had kind of like the glass setup that we have on the 4th floor for the classrooms. And if you wanted group study, you could go there. But then after that, almost all of it was individual, find a space, like your picture next to your books that are as tall as you are. Find a place that you can hide and stay in the library. So definitely things change as we go along. I hate to break this bad news to both of you, but with the exception of Emma's mention of it a little while ago, we may have an episode where we don't really talk about AI, Jim. That's okay. Because I was getting ready. I was going to say we need a sound effect or music, dun dun dun, something like that when we turn to AI. AI is certainly going to play a role in the future of libraries, but we really don't have time to go into that at this point.
That's another episode entirely.
Yeah, we'll have to have you back to talk specifically about AI and the future of libraries. Good, good. We do too. We do too, and we've often expressed those. But All right. So I just want to ask you one final question. You can kind of give the last word to you. I liked what you talked about, this idea that, annually you see these pictures of library spaces, and you can talk physical space or you can talk maybe purpose. What do you think an academic library, what do you think a university library is going to look like in 15 or 20 years? What is that going to appear to people as, do you think?
To be honest, I have no idea. Okay. I think we as librarians and library professionals try to provide what our users need for faculty and students and staff. And I think within 15 years it might look the same as far as space, but maybe modalities might be different, or maybe there's a reinvestment in space because there's a resurgence in wanting to connect. I really don't know. And I think, but that's also really wonderful at the same time, because there's a lot of opportunity for creativity and meeting the need of whatever thing might come out. But I do think physical books will still be there. They'll still be there. Yeah.
There was a time when I was afraid, and with the Kindles coming out and everything, but now it feels like it's still going to be there.
Yeah, it's settled about 50-50. I think the data is like 50-50 ebook versus physical book for like general popular use. But yeah, I think it'll still be there.
Well, thank you very much, Emma. Thanks for joining us. It's been a great conversation. Thanks to all of you for listening, and make sure that you listen to the next podcast that we drop sometime in the future. We can be really specific about that. So join us again on the Being Human UT podcast.
This has been the Being Human UT podcast with Dr. Randy Jasmine and Dr. Jim Hindigas. Please follow and subscribe on your favorite podcast platform. From Utah Tech University, this is the Being Human UT podcast. This has been a production from a podcast studio.